Sveiki, vėl įsijungę naują tinklalaidės Lietuva Amerika epizodą. Čia Vincentas Kulbinskas, o ši serija išskirtinė. Pirmą kartą vietoje įprastos apžvalgos turime tik vieną pokalbį, tačiau su ypatingu svečiu. Šiandien kalbame su Kurt Volker, buvusiu JAV ambasadoriumi prie NATO, specialiuoju atstovu Ukrainai ir žmogumi, kuris jau dešimtmečius dirba stiprindamas transatlantinius ryšius ir supranta geopolitiką iš vidaus. Be to, nuo šiol mūsų podcastas keičiasi. Vietoj ilgesnių epizodų rečiau, dabar leisime trumpesnės, bet dažnesnės serijas. Tai reiškia, kad mudviejų su žygiu analizės ir apžvalgos liks įprastai, tačiau interviu su tarptautinės politikos titanais bei kitais įtakingais asmenimis pasirodys dažniau. Tad likite su mumis ir gero klausimo.
It happens. Do you hear us?
I hear you. Hi, Ziggy. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. Kurt, I appreciate it so much. I want to introduce you to Vincent, who is, we are doing this podcast with him. And who is he? He is third generation American Lithuanian, whose grandfather came to Lithuania to become our deputy speaker. His father, with him, we created Young Christian Democrats. So that's third generation. And we did this because, we are like Cold War warriors or old wolves, but we need to explain America to Lithuanian new generation. That's okay. I start with some questions, okay? Can we record?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, Kurt, I don't know, maybe you can say a few words about yourself. I know you for 2 decades, serving all great American presidents, rescuing us, and finally opening NATO doors to the Baltics. But, few words about yourself, for those who don't know you, who might not know you.
Okay. Well, very good. Happy to do that. So, Ziggy, as you know, we've been friends for many years, and I was a U.S. diplomat for about 25 years. I served in a variety of different capacities. I worked at the U.S. mission to NATO in the late 90s. That's where we established the Membership Action Plan, and we started work towards getting the Baltic states into NATO. I then worked for Senator John McCain. Actually, I worked for Senator McCain before that. I worked for him in 97 to 98 and then went to NATO and worked on this. After NATO, I went to the National Security Council. I was in charge of NATO policy there, working with Dan Fried, who was the senior director, and spent 4 years, 4.5 at the National Security Council. We had the Prague summit. We got the Baltic states into NATO. We confirmed that at the Istanbul summit in 2004. And then I went to be ambassador to NATO after about 4 or 5 more years. I was the principal deputy assistant secretary of state for European affairs for about 3 years. And then I went to NATO as ambassador. And all of that time was really committed to building a long-term, stable, secure, prosperous, democratic Europe as a great alliance with the United States. And it was the right time to do it. We got a lot done. A lot of countries, over 100 million people, are now living in free, democratic, and secure societies compared to before we started that endeavor. So it was a really big thing. I left the government in 2009 after serving at NATO. I ran the McCain Institute for International Leadership at Arizona State University. I've done a lot of business, private sector consulting, teaching, speaking, media, think tanks, you name it, over the last 15 years. And in particular, during that time, I served as U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine negotiations. I was a volunteer capacity during the first Trump administration, and I've stayed very involved with Ukraine ever since then as well.
I will make another question to you, and maybe, Vincent, you can prepare next one. Okay, I will try to provoke you, as I usually do. You mentioned all those glorious years, and honestly, most of Central and Eastern European immigrant in America, up to 25 million, if to count us more, we vote for Republican. because, we hate what happened in Yalta with Roosevelt and so on. This is historic. But, now seeing this non-Ukrainian vote increasing in Republican Party, it's like world is changing in front of our eyes. Our biggest problem were Democrats all the time. Now with Republicans again starting to, as we see sometimes in the region, starting to reset with Russia, that made us so nervous during Obama period. Do you think we maybe it's a wrong impression about Republicans? Do you think we still have chance to have this Republican line that we all love from Reagan and Bush back on track? With people like you, I feel comfortable. But do you think we have a future of Republican Party? Shall we continue voting for Republican Party in America?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. It it it's not where we are today, and that's unfortunate. You have President Trump has changed the Republican electorate so that it's much more, much more populist, much more America first. He has become a very transactional president. So he's not looking at values and principles like we did in the Bush administration. He's looking at, what's the deal today? What do I get out of this? And at the moment, that is rather popular among the Republican electorate. What happens a few years from now, I don't know. If you remember the first term of President Trump, by the time he was done with his first term, he was rather unpopular, and there was a strong move away from what he had done as president. And it was only the last 4 years of President Biden, which was a radically progressive left agenda and a very weak foreign policy, that turned people away from Biden and back to Trump. So where we are 3 years from now, it's anyone's guess. We still do have leaders in the Republican Party who are very traditional. Nikki Haley is the first one that comes to mind. Also Mike Pompeo. We have some very good senators like Jim Risch. McConnell will be leading the Senate, but we have some others like Dan Sullivan and Mike McCormick who are very good. So I don't think by any means that traditional Republican worldview has lost, but it is not what's in control right now.
Vincent, shoot your question.
Yeah, if I could just jump in. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time to sit down with us. So my question is along similar lines as Giga's posed to you just now. Historically, the GOP was the strong anti-Russia, pro-democracy, pro-freedom, standing up for the little guy essentially. And now, especially with the second Trump term, we see a sort of dance with the devil, as it were, and sort of cozying up to authoritarians, which we didn't see with other strong Republican leaders like Reagan, like McCain, that we, especially in Lithuania, really do look up to. So my question is this: who can we look up to these days, today, to give us the example of freedom, of democracy, of that wonderful idea of what we believe America to be?
Yeah. Well, first off, I think we need to be less categorical when we talk about how Trump sees things. I don't know that he admires dictators. And that's what you hear a lot in the US. A lot of criticism of Trump is that, he prefers dictators, he likes dictators. That's who he wants to deal with. I think it is more that he views that as being realistic, that they have power, they are doing things in the world, and if you want to affect that, you have to deal with that. And that's certainly the way he talks about Putin. Putin is the one that created this war in Ukraine. If you want to stop the war, you got to deal with Putin. So I think that more of his view there. Now, in terms of who to look up to in a U.S. political context, well, I think you have a big struggle right now in the Republican Party, where you have the America First wing that is strongest. You have Vice President J.D. Vance. You have President himself. You have people that they have empowered to be in various positions. You just look across the cabinets. You have Tulsi Gabbard. You have Pete Hegseth. You have Kash Patel. You have a lot of people. And so that's where we are right now. But as I said, that's not everybody. Marco Rubio is right now the Secretary of State. Mike Waltz is the National Security Advisor. And they are much more serious and sober-minded and traditional in their view of the world. But they have to respect President Trump as the decider, as the person who is in charge. When you look out beyond this term, I'm sure there will be competition for the Republican nomination in 2028. J.D. Vance will certainly run for president. Maybe Trump will want to promote someone else from the MAGA world as his candidate that we don't know. And then I'm fairly sure that we'll see one or two traditional Republicans run as well, such as Nikki Haley. And I think there'll be a question then, what is the mood of the country at that time? Do we want to stick with the MAGA idea, or do people want to pull back a little bit and regroup? And we don't know where that goes, because that's a few years from now, and a lot of things will take place between now and then.
I agree, Trump. Kurt, sorry. And I think it will depend a lot how Ukrainian case ends. If it will become another Afghanistan in the middle of Europe, or it will be the glorious victory of European and transatlantic link and freedom that we create together, because Europeans are committed. They are scared. They are doing right things with difficulties, but they try to arm or rearm, as Andrius Kubilius is trying to put in Brussels. We also try to speed up accession talks, even finally trying to get them member of European Union in EU until 2030. My question to you, that I was posing to many congressmen on the Hill. Okay, imagine we do everything Trump asks. We beef our muscles, like we go to 3-4%, some of them like Lithuania 5-6. Then we are ready to face Russians. We are not afraid of them at all as Europeans. So if it is happening till the end of Trump administration, can we raise again the membership of Ukrainian membership in NATO?
Yeah. So this is a great question. The first thing I would say is that what I see right now today is that Europe is stepping up in terms of political commitment, in terms of the finances, in terms of military, procurement, military development, defense industry, military deployment, perhaps in Ukraine, or support for Ukraine. This is really quite something. So we've not seen this before. This is new, and it's very significant. And this is exactly what Trump has wanted to see happen. So in a way, by being as aggressive and nasty as he has been, he's actually getting a result that may be helping Ukraine, saving Ukraine, and strengthening Europe, which is a good thing. So maybe a good thing achieved by the wrong means, but if it's successful, then it's still a success. I don't think that President Trump himself is comfortable with NATO membership for Ukraine, because he views that as a burden on the United States. We would have to then fight Russia to protect Ukraine. He was even skeptical about Ukrainian membership for Montenegro, which would not have been anywhere near as difficult as Ukraine. So I just don't think he's there. But what I do think is we can keep it as an option for the future. I think we get through the Trump presidency. There's no decision one way or the other about Ukrainian NATO membership. And it's something that we can address, 3, 4, 5 years from now. And especially if we are then in a situation where you have peace, you have a meaningful deterrence presence in Ukraine, you have security assurances that are known, but even not Article 5, but they are there. That is now a good basis for bringing Ukraine into NATO without it being a dramatic move.
Well, I still hope we can do it because you did it with Bush. You've been one of those to convince him to do it. And he was not willing to do it in the beginning, and you finally managed. And I also remember that it happened by the end of our accession talks with European Union. So at the end of the process, you entered and said, okay, if Europeans are making it in order, we are coming and, sealing it. Maybe.
Yeah, and I think, in that case, as you remember, back in 2008, the Bucharest summit, the U.S. was in favor of membership action plan for Ukraine and Georgia, and it was France and Germany that blocked it. And within 4 months of that summit, Russia attacked Georgia, and took 20% of the territory. And it was only 6 years later. It seems like a different era, but it was only 6 years later when they attacked Ukraine and took Crimea and then took Eastern Donbass. So we should have actually moved on Georgia and Ukraine in 2008 for membership action plan, because it would have, I think, protected them. I think it would have sent a signal to Putin that these countries are of interest to the West, rather than sending the opposite signal, which is what we did send, is we're not ready, we're not prepared.
Vincent, please.
Yeah, going back to something that you said earlier, Mr. Volker, you did mention that the methods being employed by President Trump right now might not be, speaking in very diplomatic terms, might not be the best strategy, right? This transactionalism, this practical outlook on international relations. Well, I mean, maybe for Europe, that'll be good in the long run, right? It'll make us more independent, more able to stand on our own 2 feet. But I see that as a very big issue for America in the long run. I don't see where America's strategic interest is in that. America got ripped, got strong by having these good relations, all this goodwill, and having a foreign policy based on values, based on leading by example. So I wonder what your take is on that. What do you think America can bounce back from? I mean, let's be honest, the damage that has been done up until now in just about a month of the Trump second term.
Yeah. Well, as we said earlier, I do think it can change. I don't think that we are stuck in this moment forever. I think that I first off, I agree with your framing of that. I think American interests in the long term are supported by strong commitment to values of freedom, market economy, rule of law, democracy. I think that having allies is incredibly valuable. And I think that if you have values and allies and you can set clear goals, you actually can make long-term positive change in the world. And that is what happened for 70 years after the end of World War II. So there's no reason why that couldn't continue. We're in a moment where people are looking at this and saying the U.S. paid a disproportionate share of all this. We did too much. I don't agree with that, because I think we benefit a lot from it as well. But I see that that's what people are saying. So I think we're in a little bit of a correction. If you think of a stock market, this is now a correction. But it doesn't mean that the long-term trend is wrong. And I do think that depending on how things go, there may be there could be a catastrophe that happens, like as Dan Fried was giving an interview just the other day and said on September 10th of 2001, we didn't know that we would really be looking to our allies on September 12th, but we were glad that they were there. And that's the kind of thing that I think is right. It can happen that something happens and we will all of a sudden value having our allies again. And it could be even in Ukraine. I was thinking this morning as I was getting up, if this goes badly, Trump right now has put a lot of pressure on Zelensky, but he hasn't put any pressure on Putin. And if he doesn't start putting pressure on Putin and Ukrainians conclude that Russia's going to advance militarily again, that they won't be able to hold them off, as they are doing now at the front lines in Kursk and in eastern Ukraine. If the Russians are advancing again, you're going to see Ukrainians pack up their belongings and get in their automobiles and go to Europe. And they're going to, make themselves and their families safe, as you're going to have another massive refugee wave. And this is going to be a disaster, which is all of Trump's doing. And I think that could have a real big impact, even in the United States, that he went too far and did the wrong thing.
Agree, Kurt. Saving Ukraine, we save Europe, we save American interests, first of all. Let me put my last question on the Baltics. We are kind of, little champions of everything. We try to invest into defense as much as we can. Now we compete from 4 to 6%, who will be first to reach that goal. Per capita, we support Ukraine the most, like up to 2% GDP, not even to compare with American 0.3, though it creates so many problems in America. But you know what? We are not invited to London. We are not invited to Paris. When our defense minister is coming last week, she was with me. She's not met by Hexet. When 3 Baltic foreign ministers comes to Washington, they're not met by Rubio. We were quite well received on the Hill, but I'm old friend of many congressmen. It makes me still a bit uneasy when I see of the champions being taken from the table. If in Lithuania, in the Baltics, we start to have the feeling that we are becoming part of the menu. So how can we defeat that feeling? Can we, even use that Trump administration? If you want to empower, good example, put more troops, come here, stand with us, because please empower examples if you want to raise other Europeans to the level, at least of the Baltics. What do you think about that?
Well, I see what you're saying, Jeez. I know that's the case, that it's hard to get attention. I would say, remember, we're only 5 weeks into this Trump administration. The only confirmed official in the State Department is Secretary Rubio. There's nobody else. And the Trump administration distrusts the civil service, the foreign service, the deep state. So they don't want to empower anybody else. So it is there's a very limited amount of time that these people have. And Trump is driving them all like a madman. What do we have today? Rubio and Waltz, the 2 most important people in foreign policy other than Trump, are in Saudi Arabia because they're going to meet tomorrow with the Ukrainian delegation. So it is just difficult to get attention, and not only for the Baltic states, but for lots of people to get attention right now. That being said, I think one thing that you have already been doing, and you personally have been doing this as the chair of the committee, is strengthening Nordic-Baltic cooperation. That building a strong, democratic, and militarily robust Nordic-Baltic region is definitely of interest to the United States. It relieves the burden from the U.S. when we think about what we have to do. It adds a dimension of deterrence and stability in the north. It gives a window on the Arctic, which of course is very important to President Trump. So important that he keeps talking about Greenland. So I think that Nordic-Baltic cooperation is something that you should continue to build and make that a vehicle for engagement with the United States, that you can engage as a virtual entity, if you will.
I will do it, Kurt. Personally, I will invite you to some event on Free North that I'm trying to cook for the summer, but that's for the later. Vincent, your last question to Kurt?
No, I actually don't have any more questions. It's been a pleasure to have the chance to ask you the questions that I did ask, and once again, thank you for being here with us.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure for me. Thanks. Very nice to meet you, Vincent. And G, it's always good to see you, and hope to see you at some point in Vilnius this year.
Thank you, and see you in Washington.
Gera diskusija, likau nustebęs, Kurto atvirumu. Šviesa vis dėlto skverbėsi už diplomatinio filtro, su aiškiamis įžvalgomis apie pasaulio būklę. Ir ji dėja nėra šviesi. Tačiau net niūriausioje situacijoje slypi viltis. Mūsų ateitis nepriklauso nuo didelių deklaracijų ar tuščių pažadų. Ją užtikrina tylus, nuoseklus ir nepertraukiamas darbas. Jei mes patys nepasiduosime, jei išliksime aktyvūs ir budrūs, jei stiprinsime savo ryšius ir veiksmus, ateitis priklausys tik mums, o ne mūsų priešams. Jau ateinančią savaitę dar vienas įdomus pokalbis. Kalbėsime su ypatingu svečiu, truputį arčiau tėvynės. Ir jei patiko pokalbis, nepamirškite pasidalinti, prenumeruoti ir įvertinti mūsų savo mėgstamoje platformoje. Taip padedate mums pasiekti daugiau žmonių, kuriems rūpi geopolitika ir tėvynės ateitis. Ačiū, kad klausotės ir iki kito karto.